Hi, I'm Justine Cornelsen, a agronomy specialist with the Canola Council of Canada, and today I'm going to be talking about using seed treatments to manage blackleg on farm. So as an outline today, I am going to cover some of the disease levels, blackleg disease levels here in Canada, talk a little bit about yield loss, which is also one of our CAP projects, framing that up and one of the new tools that we've been able to develop, and then work in our best management practices and how seed treatments and foliar applications of fungicides can be used to manage blackleg. So just to help set the stage on the impact of the production impact blackleg has here in Canada, it's really good to understand the disease levels. Here in Canada, we grow a lot of canola, and the yellow bars represent the total production in millions of acres. So you can see, right, we've been the last few years up around that 20 million acres of canola. Every year, the provincial governments complete canola disease surveys, and what happens there is that they calculate the number of fields showing disease symptoms. So the black bars represent the blackleg prevalence. So typically the last handful of years, we've been in that 70 to 75% of fields surveyed are showing signs of blackleg. But thankfully at really low levels. So our incident levels, so the number of plants actually infected in the field remain low. And we have been in that kind of 10 to 15% range. But this has really increased over the last 20 years. After the introduction of resistant cultivars in the early 2000s, we were at really, really low disease incidence levels, so under 5%. So since then, we've now doubled, if not tripled on certain years, the levels of blackleg within our field. So this is something that we want to better manage and bring and reduce those levels down. So why this becomes valuable and important to reduce levels is really then understanding what that yield impact is. So not only is blackleg a trade concern, right? We do want to reduce the levels here in Canada, but we also want to reduce the impact that growers are seeing from this disease here. And it doesn't take a lot of yield loss to cause some significant impact. So this is another one of our CAP funded projects looking at the yield loss caused from blacklegs. This particular work is done through the University of Alberta. It has updated some previous models on losses. And you can see that a little bit of infection from blacklegs on that 0 to 5 scale, a rating of 1, doesn't cause any losses. It's up over a disease severity of about 1.5 is where we start to see reduction in yield. So a rating of 2, we see 20% seed yield loss per plant. And like I said, every unit that the disease pressure increases, you can expect an additional 20% losses. So not a lot of, or not a really severe infection, and you can see some really significant impacts. To help growers calculate their yield loss from blackleg, we've developed a blackleg yield loss calculator through CAP funding in partnership with the University of Alberta and SAS Canola. So this is housed on the Canola Council website at the Canola Calculator. And what it does is just help kind of grasp and put a dollar value to what potentially could be being lost to blackleg within the fields. And really this is puts emphasis on that need for scouting and knowing what you're working with. So you do need to be completing a blackleg disease survey. You need to have the incidence levels, the severity levels, and from there you can calculate what the loss would be. So running the projected yield and then the dollar value for canola at the time gives you some economics behind it. So you can look at the percentage of yield loss per plant. You can then assess also the potential yield loss in regards to bushels per acre, and then what the dollar value of that would be. So like I said, this is a new tool that is available online for growers and agronomists to use. So knowing that blackleg is widespread here in Canada, thankfully at lower levels, we want to keep it that way. And we don't want to get to these higher levels where growers could potentially be seeing yield losses. So we've got a list of best management practices that have been in place for quite some time. There's been emphasis placed and there's been some clarification on a few of them, but a lot of them have been the same. I am just going to highlight a few little pieces for each one just to help set the stage of where we then could be using fungicide products and what a fungicide seed treatment could do to change up our management. So number one is crop rotation. This has not changed. This is something that we see in a lot of our disease management tools and tactics. you've got to be able to allow the stubble to break down within the field. Right, blackleg being a stubble-borne disease, it needs just time to allow this old residue to break down. Typically, what we're recommending right now is at least a 2-year break. With a 2-year break, you're able to allow the residue to break down for the most part fully within the field. We get lots of questions in regards to, burying stubble, burning stubble. All of these things, what they do is they leave behind that really hardy piece of root, which is housing the Leptosphaerium maculans fungi. So like I said, it's something that if we can just leave it out, usually Mother Nature takes care of it. We do, however, need some moisture, which we haven't seen a whole lot of the last few years to help speed up that breakdown. So anytime we can get some moisture and lots of snowpack, we're hoping that that's going to help break down the residue a little more fully. But crop rotation remains our top practice. If we're able to maintain a healthy and a diverse crop rotation, we're really able to suppress any sort of impacts from this particular disease. So number 2 on the list of management is crop scouting. This is something that you find in every integrated pest management approach and tactics is scouting. You need to know what you're working with. With blackleg, it does show itself in many different ways. It has just different signs and symptoms throughout the season. So it's training that eye and knowing what to be looking for. So one of the tools that we've developed throughout this CAP funding cycle is a new blackleg disease life cycle. So same, just to really train the eye to what to be looking for and when to be looking for it. So we've got different cycles within it. We've highlighted that critical window for infection. I'm going to start referring to that quite a few times when we get into seed treatments, as early in the season is a really vulnerable time for canola plants and for that blackleg pathogen to move in. So this is where we want to be protecting the plants early on in the season. So through this, we've been able to develop new resources to help train agronomists and farmers to better be out there and assessing for blackleg. So one of the best times to scout for blackleg is right prior to harvest. So this can happen before you go and straight cut the crop or before you go swap the crop. And why we really encourage that growers go out and assess the crop then for blackleg damages. At that point, you can easily identify the disease, but also you can calculate the potential yield loss seen from it. So this is something through our Keep It Clean program that is really pushed. It is one of our tips through that program, and that program is designated to help growers or provide growers with resources to make sure that they have market-ready crops. So this is a really key component and tactic of it. So that's why we really encourage for growers to get out and scout at that time. So disease scouting, I won't get into all the specifics and ins and outs, but like I said, you can then use the information that you gather from scouting and completing your own blackleg disease survey to help run the yield loss and run the economics behind what that impact might be. And really, it's over time you want to be assessing this. So from year to year, are you seeing increases in the blackleg levels on your farm? And at what point are you wanting to do something further about it? And that's where we'll start to then think of the use of other products, such as rotating resistance genes, or looking at using a blackleg foliar fungicide or seed treatment. So the third management tactic, and one that we probably rely on the heaviest, is our blackleg resistant cultivars or hybrids. So everything that's commercially available here in Canada is either resistant or moderately resistant to blackleg. And you heard earlier from Dr. Fernando getting into major gene resistance and understanding and gene rotation. And the second component of this workshop is then focusing on quantitative resistance. So I'm not going to get into any further detail here, just that we really value these tools and that because of them, we've really seen really low disease levels. So they are kind of our anchor to our management. We don't want to rely solely on them, and that's where that overall integrated pest management approach and using other things like crop rotation really come into play to help keep disease levels low. So our top 3 management practices are the ones that we put the most emphasis on for controlling blackleg here in Canada. Where we start to explore other management tactics is when we're doing one of the first 3 things incorrectly or poorly. So we are using resistant hybrids everywhere. However, we're putting a lot of pressure on them through tightened crop rotations and lack of scouting. So it's kind of falls back to those two particular practices is where we start to see a downfall and why we start exploring other opportunities for management of this disease. Resistant stewardship is seen as kind of a secondary management tactic. I'm not going to get once again into a lot of detail about resistance. We're going to hear more about it, but it is an area where, as an industry, we've invested a lot of research dollars into, and to really to understand, what our canola cultivars are using for resistant genes, if it's quantitative versus major genes. We've also looked into the pathogens, so Leptosphaeria maculin's race profile at the ground level. Growers are able to submit samples and identify those predominant races in the field, and then fully understanding the interaction between the pathogen and the host itself. So knowing all of those little pieces of the puzzle will allow us to increase the longevity of our resistant sources that we're using. Foliar applications or foliar fungicide applications for blackleg have been in place for quite some time. It's not a practice that is widely adopted here in Canada. Very few amount of growers actually use this, mainly because they don't see a return on investment. And there's a few things at play there. A lot of times this application goes on too late, or their resistant cultivars are working really, really well in the field already. So in this, we've had some work go through Dr. Gary Pang's lab in Ag Canada, Saskatoon, which really highlighted that, we see fungicide effects, or they're much more apparent on susceptible cultivars. Well, here in Canada, we don't grow susceptible cultivars, right? So it's only in these really high disease pressure areas, or where we've got erosion of the resistant cultivars that we're using. So high kind of blackleg incidence and severity situations paired with short crop rotations is where you would see some reduction in disease on these moderately resistant or resistant cultivars. Dr. Pang's work also looked at the early application versus late application. And through that, he's really invested a lot of time looking at that critical window for infection. So the earlier you can protect the plants, the better. A lot of our infection coming from Leptosphaeria maculans is coming in at that cotyledon one leaf stage. So unfortunately, a lot of our products are only registered from that 2 to 6 leaf stage. So the earlier, the better, but you're still probably not early enough. And so it really comes down to timing. Timing is everything when you are going to be applying a foliar fungicide application. Seed treatments in the past have protected against seed-borne blackleg, but not airborne blackleg. So this is where we've got new products coming to market that are going to protect the plants while they're growing from a blackleg infection. And what this will do is it's going to be able to protect plants at that critical window for infection. So that early season control that has been missing will now be available. And when we look at the foliar fungicides, right, the application just wasn't hitting that critical window. And now with the seed treatment, there will be protection. Once again, very similar to that of foliar applications, we see the effects and the benefits really come forth on a susceptible cultivar. But in situations where we do have the high disease pressure and we are starting to erode or break down some of the resistant genes that we are using, this is where a seed treatment may help really alleviate some of that pressure and reduce blackleg yield losses. So the treatments that are coming forth, they are SDHI products, so they are group 7 fungicides. So next year there will be 2 products available on the market. One is Vaqueros, that is distributed through BASF, and the other one is Saltro with Syngenta. So there are two products there. I'm not going to get into the specifics because they are marketed and used quite differently. One's an add-on, one's a base treatment, and they are packaged with different actives. So I'm not going to get too heavily invested into going into those types of specifics, but I'm going to talk about the research behind these products. So the first active ingredient that I'm going to talk about is fluopyrin. This will be a part of the Vaqueros seed treatment moving forward. It was tested a few years back with Dr. Gary Pang at Ag Canada, Saskatoon. And what he did was compare it to other treatments available at that time. And just to remember and reference that, right, there to that point, there was no seed treatments available to protect against airborne blackleg. So it was just protecting against the standards, and a product that was also used in Australia, which is referred to as Jockey, which is group C here. But you can see what happens in regards to infection on cotyledons. So doing greenhouse inoculations and ratings, you can see with the use of fluopyrin, which is listed here as D, there was no infection on cotyledons in your susceptible check being Westar, and then a resistant cultivar being in Vigor at that time. And same, if you don't like the graphic version, here's the visual version. So you can see here the complete control on the cotyledon tests or the inoculation tests, so that the pathogen is not able to colonize and cause any sort of spread on those cotyledons. So this is where you can highlight and see how it does work really, really well. And same, this top row here is Westar, and then your resistant cultivar on the bottom, showing very similar effects at that early stage in development. So the second active I want to talk about is phytoplumatophan, which is the active that's going to be used in Sultro, so the product from Syngenta. This active was tested and worked on at the University of Manitoba. So they've got a manuscript that's under review right now to be published. But you can see very similar results as to that of the fluopyrin, where you've got this great control on your cotyledons. And so in the greenhouse doing the test, you're able to see this control. So same here in your Westar versus your resistant cultivar. You can see that overall, when the resistance is working, you're going to have smaller impacts or smaller leaf lesions from this particular disease. And when you add that active ingredient in the seed treatments, that's where you get really great control. So same here, just to look at the graphic and the significant differences here in regards to disease severity. So on that susceptible cultivars where you really see these products work well. But similar to that, we are seeing it at the early stages within our hybrids and our resistant hybrids, but not as visually pleasing or as significant as in those susceptible cultivars. Both researchers took this work obviously into field trials and took it to yield. And this is where we start to see the resistant cultivars pull apart. And it doesn't really matter what treatment's on there. The resistance is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. So we don't really necessarily see that impact or a strong benefit from using a seed treatment. So you can see here the seed yield in comparison to your susceptible check being Westar, in comparison to that of a resistant cultivar. So the resistant cultivar is out yielding it and outperforming it with all of its different treatments, even with the check being no fungicide control. You do see the active or the added active for airborne blackleg control performing well in this, but you can see it overall comes back to that resistant cultivar is still outperforming it. So this, it really questions the use of it. And it kind of comes back to those high pressure situations where you're looking for a little bit of extra relief, or maybe we've done a poor job scouting, so we're using it as another layer of protection early on in the season. So as for takeaways for seed treatments, right, this is a new tool that we have access to, but like foliar fungicide applications, really we see great protection on susceptible cultivars. And for the most part, well, we don't grow susceptible cultivars. Some of our resistant cultivars may act like susceptible when under heavy pressure or dealing with new races or new novel races that can overcome it. So the efficacy is rather low on resistant cultivars when they're functioning properly and to their full extent. What seed treatments will offer is that early season protection at that critical window of infection. But it really comes back to our other management practices, right? Crop diversity, so crop rotation being so extremely important in managing this disease, along with crop scouting and the use of resistant cultivars. They will remain our top three management tactics, and everything further will be secondary. They will help kind of alleviate pressure in those really high disease scenarios. So thanks for your time today. There's a lot of information here packed worked in. All of it can be found online through Canola Council resources. So definitely check that out and check the Canola Encyclopedia where a lot of this research is housed. And I look forward to the panel discussion and taking any questions then.